Well, last Friday, Houston, Texas, for those of you who don't know, shut it down. Businesses were closed, students walked out of school, thousands stayed home in response to calls for a citywide day of action demanding ICE get out of Houston and demanding justice for Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, the 52-year-old father and homebuilder who was shot and killed by an ICE agent on July 7th while he was driving to work with his crew. That murder happened less than a week before ICE agents killed Joan Sebastian Guerrero outside his home in Biddeford, Maine, in front of his wife and 3-year-old daughter. This shutdown in Houston followed weeks of vigils and marches that were organized in Houston across the city. Then, on Wednesday, while preparations were underway for this mass day of action in Houston, news broke of the police killing of 38-year-old father Corey Ruiz in Madison, Wisconsin. Video recorded by eyewitnesses shows officers surrounding Ruiz, tasing him, effectively, rendering him immobile, and then shooting him 3 times execution style at close range. The encounter lasted essentially 30 seconds from start to finish, and immediately the people of Madison took to the streets to demand an end to police terror and to demand justice for Corey Ruiz. So murders by ICE and the police are on the rise, and the people of the United States are responding as they have historically done, with mass protests and demands not just for justice in this case and the imprisonment of these officers which committed the crime, but also for structural changes. So to break down why we're seeing this increase in state violence against Black and brown communities in the United States and how communities are organizing and fighting back, we are very excited to be joined by Rachel Dumont, an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation in Houston. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So these last few weeks have been very intense, and you've really been at the epicenter of this. For many people, what we're seeing in the past several weeks is perhaps reminiscent of what we've seen in other hot summers, 2014, 2015, 2020. But this summer has been a little different because alongside the atrocious police murders of Black people that we've seen in several cities, we've also seen several murders of immigrants who have been pursued by Immigration and Customs federal agents in the context of immigration enforcement operations. And so while not totally new, as the people of Houston know, the instances of people being killed in the context of these operations is way less common than, for example, police murders of Black people. So in the last 2 weeks, we've seen an intersection really of these deadly expressions of the deep racism of the state and its security forces. So before we get into talking about the fight back, talk to us about this moment. We're a year and a half into the Trump administration. People are really angry about a lot of things that are happening in this country, the war in Iran, the price of living on a daily basis, their tax fund dollars going to genocide. So, and of course, the state murders on the streets. So are we seeing a resurgence of state violence right now? Why is that? And how are people seeing these murders in connection to one another?
Yeah, 100%. The reality is that we are in a very visible, explicit war for our basic survival right now. One side has all the resources, while our side, which is the side of the majority, the millions of working class Americans in this country, is fighting amongst itself for scraps. Republicans and Democrats alike are doing absolutely nothing to alleviate the suffering that so many of us are facing. In fact, it's been a bipartisan effort to keep pushing forward budget cuts to the things that actually matter and increasing the budgets for institutions like ICE, policing, and war. And so you have millions of people struggling to make ends meet, wars raging on around the globe with our tax dollars, and our neighborhoods are not being boosted with funding or relief, but with militarized agents to surveil us, intimidate us, and kill us when we're deemed a threat for being Black, brown, or poor. The duality of this moment is not really a coincidence, though. Trump is waning in popularity. People are becoming increasingly conscious to the reality that the ills in our society are systemic, and people are angry. People are looking for answers. We've seen some of the largest mass movements take the streets since Trump has been back in office. And so, of course, the easy solution for Washington is to try to instill fear in all of us, to make us point at our neighbor as the culprit. They tell us that immigrants are taking all the jobs or poor Black people are abusing the social programs available. And that's why you don't have what you need. But these are all lies designed to distract us from the real people responsible for our conditions, which are billionaires who hoard all of the wealth. And that's why it's even more critical at this time that we underscore the interconnectedness of this war that's being waged. And so we are seeing the deportation machine ramping up drastically. We see ICE terrorizing our communities, immigrant and non immigrant alike. And so aren't the police. That hasn't stopped. The increased collaboration between these forces in many cities, including here in Houston, is worth noting. There are 90 cities and counting with 287G agreements enforcing that collaboration, the majority in states like Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Alabama. At this point, it's hard to even tell who is who. So this isn't a moment to divide our struggles. That's literally the cornerstone tactic of the very people carrying out this terror against us. The forces that murdered Lorenzo Salgado Araujo and Joan Sebastian Guerrero are the same forces that murdered Corey Ruiz and now most recently a 17-year-old Anthony Williams in Austin. The only thing that's really different is the color of their uniform. This is a moment for bridging the inherent connection between the fight against ICE terror and the fight against police terror. It's a moment to fight against the racism in all of its forms that's core to this system, from policing and mass incarceration to kidnappings and deportations. This is a moment to fight for the right for our communities to be able to thrive and exist with safety and dignity without that right being contingent on the color of our skin, the language we speak, or the neighborhood that we live in.
Well, you, Rachel, are an organizer currently based in Houston, right? Where groups have been organizing since the day the news broke of Lorenzo's murder by ICE. And then this past Friday, as we mentioned, the Houston community organized a no business as usual day of action, building on that energy. So, talk to us a little bit about this process of organizing in the wake of Lorenzo's murder. How has the community in Houston responded? And what are the demands right now?
Yeah, the Houston community right now is engulfed with grief, honestly, over the tragedy that was Lorenzo's murder by ICE, but is simultaneously seething with anger, fed up with the brutality and in motion to win justice, not for Lorenzo only, but for the entirety of our community. Since Lorenzo was murdered on July 7th, Houston has been in the streets on a near daily basis. This hasn't really been covered enough in the mainstream media. There's been a broad coalition of groups holding vigils, protests, marches, benefits, and fundraisers. We've demanded answers and justice at the sites of power. We mobilized the East End community, which is a historically Latino neighborhood where Lorenzo built his family and was simultaneously murdered, to shut down the streets. Not to mention, it has been nearly 100 degrees every day in Houston since his murder. But the extreme heat, the tough conditions have failed to stop the will of the people to win justice. And all of this, it's worth mentioning, is in spite of the smear campaign that ICE and others have tried to wage against Lorenzo, painting him as a criminal worthy of his death, claiming he had drugs in his van that actually just turned out to be electrolytes. That's because we know the truth about Lorenzo and the truth about these murderous killers. Today actually marks 3 weeks since Lorenzo was murdered, 3 weeks. And one of the key demands has been centered around the fact that we still do not know the names of the killer ICE agents. Continually, everyone points the finger, claiming that that's somebody else's job, but we know that somebody has the names, somebody has the footage, and it's only a matter of time until they are forced to release that evidence. Just yesterday, the continued pressure of our mobilization won a victory: the release of one of Lorenzo's passengers and witnesses to his murder. This man, Jose, along with two other men, have been held in detention for weeks. And it's convenient that they are the only witnesses outside of ICE of this murder and have been held and even threatened with deportation. Two of these men remain in detention, and so will continue to fight for their immediate release. We are also demanding the arrest, the full prosecution of these killer ICE agents, because they executed a man on his way to work. They are murderers, and they must be brought to justice for that. And lastly, we are demanding an end to all collaboration between ICE and the Houston Police Department. It is this really carefree collaboration and the quiet expansion of terror into our neighborhoods that has resulted in Lorenzo's murder in the first place. So we have to ask, why were they patrolling the East End neighborhood before 7 a.m. anyway? They knew exactly what they were doing, and we demand an end to that.
Hmm. I mean, it is interesting. You say that the violence, police violence is the only difference between that and ICE violence is the color of the uniform. And they're even using the same playbook after killing someone, attempting to come up with evidence of why they needed to be killed. Of course, they didn't pull him over and shoot him because they thought there were drugs in the van. But just more overlaps there. And, Trump's war on immigrants has always been couched in this myth about protecting Americans and cracking down on crime. We know this was kind of the main narrative push in the first 6 months of the Trump administration. But national data actually shows violent crime and homicides falling to some of the lowest levels in a century, even as police killings remain near record highs. So what do we make of this disconnect?
I mean, exactly. The expansion of policing, of ICE, of the repressive apparatuses within our communities overall has never been about stopping crime. The research has shown time and time again how these forces always arrive at the scene after so-called crimes have already taken place anyway. Their role in society has nothing to do with preventing crime and everything to do with instilling fear in our communities and surveilling us. For decades, we have been told that immigrants and that Black people are the source of all of our suffering in this country. We're told that they are innately violent criminals and a threat to public safety. But these are racist lies. They are only meant to divide us and distract us from the real issue of who has power and wealth in our society and who doesn't. But this is also incredibly convenient in distracting us from the roots of crime to begin with. Crime doesn't emerge in a vacuum. It grows out of poverty, inequality, unstable housing, underfunded schools, lack of healthcare, economic desperation. These issues aren't solved with an increase in policing or ICE presence. They are solved with a fundamental shift in economic relations. But if, the people in power can set us up to believe that it's a particular community that we need to fear, immigrants, Black people, even trans people, that deflects all responsibility that they have in creating the conditions of suffering that we are experiencing. They're able to paint themselves as doing us a solid by allegedly making our community safer with the influx of armed agents. And better yet for them, expand state repression that serves to keep our people subjugated. The data says it all. Immigrants are not driving crime in this country. They are the scapegoats for the real crimes that are being inflicted upon us by the people in power.
And Rachel, amidst all of this, the Supreme Court, as you know, recently greenlit the Trump administration to end temporary protected status for roughly 350,000 Haitians. Can you explain what that means for the people who are impacted in practical terms? And, what about for the greater communities in which they live and work? How does the fight against ISIS tactics in a place like Houston connect to this broader fight over policies like TPS?
Totally. I mean, ending TPS for hundreds of thousands of Haitians doesn't just mean that they're losing legal status. It means they're waking up every day wondering whether they can go to work, whether they can pick up their kids from school, whether they'll be separated from their family on that day. Many TPS holders have built their lives in this country over many years, even decades, and now all of a sudden are left at the mercy of ICE. This must be seen for what it is, which is a racist assault aimed at a community that actually serves to make this country run. Haitian TPS holders are essential to this country's workforce. They are employed in many key sectors like agriculture, hospitals, nursing homes, transportation, hospitality, and more. And so deporting hundreds of thousands of Haitians will weaken our communities across the board. It's also important to acknowledge in talking about TPS why so many Haitians sought refuge here in the first place, a story that is actually so similar across many immigrant communities. The instability, the violence that is unfortunately plaguing Haiti right now didn't happen in a vacuum or because of some innate deficiency of the Haitian people as is often portrayed in the mainstream media. Haiti is a victim of decades of forced intervention, economic exploitation, and political interference primarily by the United States. And so you have hundreds of thousands of people who are trying to flee these conditions, coming to the US to make a new life, only to then be violently captured and sent back to these very conditions. This is absolutely disgusting. ICE is preparing for another surge in order to carry out a mass deportation operations of Haitians right now. But this isn't going to affect just Haitians. It's going to affect all of us because armed masked agents are going to be swarming our communities and encroaching on our civil liberties even more. Not to mention that Lorenzo Salgado Araujo was murdered by ICE and was not even the so-called target of the ICE operation. So who's to say that that won't continue with an influx of ICE in our neighborhoods? And I think we cannot forget that ICE has murdered citizens as well.
Mm. And before we let you go, Rachel, for people who are watching this right now and want to do more for the fight for justice and for immigrant rights, what's the most effective thing that people can do right now?
I mean, I think at this moment, we really find ourselves at a crossroads. Are we going to allow our government to unleash taxpayer funded agents of repression on us, murdering our people left and right, or are we going to fight back? Are we going to normalize this string of violence against civilians and buy into these lies and the consistent defamation campaigns the government rushes to carry out against the victims in the aftermath of these tragedies? Or are we going to take the streets, put pressure on the centers of power, and force an end to this terror once and for all? I think if you want to support the fight for immigrant justice, you have to join the fight. The people in power bank on us watching these atrocities online, on our phones, alone in our rooms, remaining isolated. But this is really a moment, unlike others, to come together and recognize the power that we have and heighten the pressure to win the demands that we need. And we have history to look to as a way forward. I mean, just earlier this year, the people of Minnesota changed the entire narrative when massive actions in the streets were able to successfully drive out Operation Metro Surge and also get Kristi Noem and Greg Bovino fired. When working class people come together and are able to stop large sections of the economy, when we disrupt business as usual, that's when change is made out of the fear that the people in power have of us. Right now, again, they are banking on being able to escalate this ICE repression, this police repression in our communities without anyone making them feel the heat that they felt in Minnesota just a few months ago. And we have to let them know that they aren't going to get away with it.
Well, Rachel Domond, thank you so much for joining us here at BT Live. And we'll be sure to be back with you soon. Have a great day.
Thanks.